Okay, sorry.
Well, we should go. No, I know.
Welcome back.
I think I know them both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome back to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. This morning we were also talking about an ask that a program we want to build on that we may be considering as an amendment to our housing bill. And it was in our original bill as a draft, and we took it out, and we would love to hear more about it. And so we welcome Laura Collins.
Thank you. I'm Laura Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. Yes, we're talking about off-site construction opportunities. This is something that was in your bill. Also, I'll mention is in the House Housing Bill. And so the language under consideration is identical both to the Senate and the House. And you remember that you heard testimony from Jeff Lubell, the author of a study that VHFA did in partnership with the Department of Housing, as well as the Vermont Economic Development Authority, VEDA. And the three of us hired Jeff and someone else to write a report on what the off-site manufactured housing opportunities are in Vermont. You also heard from Deputy Commissioner Formulary about a few things that the department has been hearing about. There's a Fairhaven plant that a lot of people talk about wanting to restart, but I'm just
going to show David McGraw, section 23 in draft 3.1, if you want to find it.
Can I think Alex Horowitz from Pew Trust yesterday made a really excellent point that I don't want to get lost, that offsite sounds like a fun way to say all of the types of housing that are not stick built at the site of the lot, right? But he made a very clear distinction that of the essentially three types of offsite housing, manufactured is the only one where you see significant savings. Yeah, and I think that was a really important point.
Mm-hmm. You also heard testimony. It wasn't the topic wasn't offsite construction, but I was in the room when you were hearing from one of VHFA's board members, Jeannie Morrissey, as well as Eric Hoekstra from Redstone, who also cautioned the committee to say that just because it's offsite doesn't mean it is inherently cheaper.
Right.
So the report that VHFA commissioned with others really drilled down on that was to say, just because something is built offsite does not make it cheaper. There are only certain ways to make housing cheaper. And the recommendations from the study and what this appropriation for a study committee would look at is, could Vermont create the environment to have those elements that do make housing cheaper? Because offsite manufactured housing is not going to do it. But what it would take to make it cheaper would be bulk purchase. And we have some experience with the manufactured housing infill program that the state is running in partnership with the State Housing Authority. So bulk purchase, but I got 1,000 questions about bulk purchase. Like, am I buying them?
Right.
With what money? Where am I sticking these homes? Under what is there a market for the ones I happen to go bulk buy? What does that market look like? Are these owned? Are they rented? How many bedrooms? How many baths? Who's carrying the carrying costs of these? These are the questions that would have to be assessed, and why we need time and why we need some money to really build that out. Another thing that the report showed of how to make it cheaper is standardizing the codes, which I know this committee really glommed onto and got maybe a little more excited about, was the idea of having statewide building codes, because let's just pretend VHFA goes and bulk purchases 100 homes, so we get an economy of scale, and maybe the prices are a little lower. If we can't site them in 3 dozen of our job center communities, then what? We're just putting them into the towns where these have been allowed. We all of a sudden have bought these homes and it's not in locations where we want, or we need to now start customizing those homes to meet the local codes. That's gonna lose the efficiency.
Benefit.
But if there were some kind of standardization in partnership with this, then I do think that there's some room, for potential for cost savings, as well as timing. You know, where are these sites? How do we identify these lots if we're talking about being in communities? That's where the mobile home infill project, I think was able to achieve some savings, was that they were just looking at parks, communities that had lots, many of which had already been improved to accept the homes. And so that cost wasn't part of this. Are we going to be in that position? Are these going onto private land or, you know,
There's the water sewer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You may have heard through the grapevine that I am not enthusiastic about any additional study committee.
I like it.
Tom is a newfound fan of study.
I'll watch you.
He's
sum
at
up a
that
little
phase
bit.
of his legislative career.
Uh,
I have two proposals that are on the table right now. One is by right for manufactured housing, and the other is taking the DHCD toolkit about the types of blueprints and housing that are suggested and saying that by next year, please make that a by right toolkit, similar to what Maine has. And include the HUD certified manufactured housing, you know, include the things that should be allowed everywhere. We should look at lot size as well. That was a great point from Pew Trust that we hadn't had sort of numbers around scenario around, which is also in my bill. You know, that you can do 5 units per acre in more areas now. I have to really be convinced that we need a study committee and not just to get the work going and just put DHCD in charge of it and say, like, we need this to happen. Like, because what I actually worry about more than anything is that we let go of FEMA trailers. We couldn't find a place to even put FEMA trailers. And that's going to happen again, sadly. And I can't wait for everyone to, like, you know, sing Kumbaya. We really need every community to know that this is allowed and that it's especially going to happen in a disaster situation, and we were not giving the FEMA trailers back again.
Right. So I think
Hazel, you can write all that down and tell ACCD, because this is an emergency. It's been an emergency. It's more of an emergency. People need to know where they can put well-designed pods and sleeping, units for people. I just don't want to study. I'm working myself up even more.
I think you're working yourself up. I think we should finish hearing from more about why this is an important piece of work that we need to pull together to continue and finish.
Well, I'll say, when I'm not sitting in this chair, I actually have 3 kids, and so I refuse to pick a favorite. And so those ideas sound great. And if this was another one, I do think, like, we need it all.
Yeah.
So,
And.
yes. I also, I want to highlight the fact that, going back to the very original point, which is just because it's built offsite does not make it cheaper on its own, which is why at one point in this session, I was being encouraged strongly to skip the study committee and just roll out a program and just say, okay, if you know that bulk purchase and standardization and all this works, just do it. And that would be the wrong next step. And I shared with the House General Committee a 4-page memo, single space, bullet lines straight, of just my thinking about the questions that I would need answered in partnership with others before we were ready to launch a program. And I think it would be a disservice for the state to just move forward quickly without thinking about the types of construction, the site work, the rental versus homeownership questions, the priorities. You know, are we looking at supporting Vermont-based manufacturers and employers? You know, is this a housing program or is this an employment program?
Or maybe both.
Exactly. And, where does physical accessibility, where does efficiency come in? Are we looking to really do this the cheapest we can or the greenest we can? And I haven't firm it, like, I'm just going on and on in terms of who determines where these are placed or the structure. A lot about the secondary market and financing. If we're talking about home ownership, we have to make sure whatever we do goes from there. So I do not think that the state, if it is going to put financial resources behind the program, is ready to do that until we've answered these questions. Now, what I hear you talking about, Senator, are more planning, zoning, allowance, and all that. That doesn't need a summer study committee because that could be pushed forward. But if we were going to be talking to the state about creating some kind of loan loss reserve or a backfill or appropriating money to do these bulk purchases or something like that, then I don't think the state is ready for that without going in a smart way and really limiting the funnel from everything that's possible down to what the priorities of the state really are. Because while HUD manufactured homes, what people think of as a traditional single wide or double wide mobile home is one visual we have. There is also panelized housing. There is modular where, boxes are put together, and other things. And so understanding what the opportunities are in Vermont, and then again, where those priorities are, is probably, if you're going to take a next step in terms of building out the funding for a program, answering these questions is necessary before I would ever support an appropriation or taking that next step.
But answering questions is different than asking for money to do a study.
Correct. And so the money to do a study, what's going on there is we have to answer again. I came up with 4 pages worth of questions. I'm sure if I sat in a room with 6 other people, we would more than double that, because that's just one person's thinking of questions I have. Other smart people will have other smart questions. And all the housing agencies, as well as VITA, are really busy and have a full workload in front of them before we dropped this report in January and started talking about it. And frankly, a lot of members of the legislature got really excited and want us to just launch a program. And so the idea of funding this study committee was the fact that staffing is tight, and we probably have to look at hiring consultants, whether I'm not going to say Jeff Lubell, but that idea of just needing expert experience, Pew, but also looking at people who would be willing to talk with New Hampshire and Maine and do site visits up to Quebec and figure out what is possible and what could happen. And that is hard for the agencies to absorb on top of what we're already doing in other ways. Now, so the 250,000 is not just for VHFA. That was a ballpark number that you're welcome to play with, of thinking about one FTE that would project manage this and make sure we met the deadlines. I have heard some in this committee talk about the frustration of summer study committees that meet once a month and, by December or January have very little to report on it. This would be a very different type of study, which would mean, and that's why it comes with appropriations ask, is because we would need to have a work plan and build toward a very clear request. On the House side, they really wanted something by this fall so that they could be considering it next year in the appropriations process, come in January, knowing what a program looks like. And what I'm saying is there are so many questions that timeline is too short.
Yeah, you've asked for December 26th.
Exactly. We would do progress reports however often you want, but that I could not answer these 4 pages of questions between now and this coming December. It would take longer than that because we would be literally building out a program. Who's in charge? I mean, I'm in the chair, so I feel like I can only talk about VHFA. But I do not think that VHFA is necessarily the one to be doing this. The State Housing Authority already has a program running. Why wouldn't you build off that? DHCD is your state housing department who should be in charge of all this, and they have the Homes for All. You can bring that in. Vita is a part of this because of the economic development opportunities and the job training and what this could leverage in terms of small business support, like the Fairhaven plant, but other opportunities I'm sure are out there. And so there are very real questions about who's in charge, who has what role, how much of this goes toward the business support and supporting the manufacturing versus the code questions versus the marketing questions and consumer insights, and as well as we've talked about, looking at a Northern New England approach to see if we could work in partnership with other states so that if we narrowed it down to 3 or 4 models and Vermont could only commit to buying 50 homes of 3 different models, maybe we don't see the savings in that regard, but maybe we get the savings if New Hampshire and Maine also committed to those 3 models. And then all of a sudden we're purchasing 200 homes of each model.
It could be multi-state.
If that's what, we're already starting to have some conversations with Maine about that.
Have you looped in the Northern Borders, Regional Commission on this?
Not yet. That's one of the things we would do if we had this. Right now, again, I don't have the staffing to fully do all the things that I think are necessary, but can't do on my own.
Yes, location.
I just gonna keep throwing a wrench in things. I think it is our job. I can think of nothing more important this session than to be thinking about how we develop and site well-built emergency housing.
That's not just what this is about.
Okay,
This is
and
about
we
all
are already in flood watch season.
right.
And I think it is I think Doug Farnham should be in charge of this right now. I mean, when we hear who's in charge of this, and it's gonna take 2 years. Everyone heard the flood warning yesterday or 2 days ago.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to have the sense of urgency that acknowledges that all of us failed Vermonters in the last flood.
That is a big question of who failed Vermonters. It's not just.
Okay,
I mean, I think that is so big.
well, that's
Given
why I'm
climate
throwing the
change.
biggest wrench I've found and everything, because I feel like we are complicit in work avoidance, in letting our focus be on studies and things down the road, and we are going to fail people again this flood season.
Again, I think that's taking on a huge amount onto our shoulders in terms of accepting that alone. I think that you
Who else
also
is
don't
gonna do
get,
it?
well, there's the
Can I
question.
ask
Yeah.
what it is you're intending to do? Are you gonna line up trailers that are poised and ready to respond to the next disaster? I'm not quite following what you're.
So I would, frankly, we should take testimony on why we ended up not using the FEMA trailers we were given, why they were set on sides of roads and discussions were being had, and by the time the Northeast Kingdom heard about them and tried to access them, they had been given back. What people are still living in substandard housing right now, post-flood, what people are worried about where they live and how to move away from where they are. I just feel like we are going to wait for another disaster to happen before we put our focus back on people who are precariously housed right now and will add to our homelessness crisis, because we are arguing about siting and sourcing.
In all fairness, we need to do all those things. We need to be having that conversation with Doug. It's a great to prepare for this spring. And what are they doing to prepare for this spring? And what are we doing to prepare for housing people, additional people who are going to be unhoused because perhaps of another emergency? But I think we also need to do planning for the future because it's only getting worse.
Okay, but
So-
so both hands, it's
Well,
like, it's not
I
really
think-
happening.
I think both, I'm sorry, I think we need to do both and I don't think there's any reason for us not to be able to be doing both. So I completely agree. It would be
Then
great
give
to
me
hear.
2 days to have testimony on this topic.
No, we have, I think we have a time to have testimony on this topic. I think on this particular one, if we're looking at an amendment for our housing bill for right now, we have a time crunch. I would remind us that our amendments are gonna come from individuals. So if we don't all agree on an amendment, it can come from individuals, 3, 4 of us, whatever that is. Because we do not have possession of the bill. The bill is now out and in other committees. And we also can continue this conversation because we're getting a housing bill
Yeah.
and we have a vehicle for further discussion. I think that there is an immediate concern about what happens in flood season now. That's absolutely true, but that's not what this is dealing with. What this is dealing with is looking at how we can do it better for the future. And we have a future, hopefully. And despite all the concerns at the moment about the world, we are optimistically planning on the future. And how do we do that more effectively, efficiently, and save people money and time?
May I offer a suggestion? The first, if I pulled up the next steps from the report that you all saw and were briefed on, the first recommendation was review and confirm the state's policy objectives and priorities. And that's where, when I say I'm looking at this as a huge funnel, I'm not ready to deliver you an offsite program or request because we're at the very top part of that funnel. And I don't know what you or the House or Vermonters want right now.
Mhm.
Do you want an disaster recovery type program developed and delivered? Which, Senator, that's what I'm hearing
Yeah.
is your top priority. I also hear people talk about unhoused Vermonters and the changes to the hotel motel program, and that maybe that should be more pod housing like Burlington has done, maybe in more municipalities that there be more homeless housing if there's not going to be hotel rooms to house everyone. I also hear about using underutilized mobile home park, which I call manufactured housing community lots, and infill of vacancies there, which is really what the VSHA program
That was what.
has been targeting, but there are others, if we improved some more lot pads, maybe there could be some expansion of some communities, that. I talked about private land and just people who just need cheap housing because they can't afford to live somewhere, but maybe their parent or friend or whatever would subdivide a little thing, and if they could get a cheap enough home, we could really drive home ownership and housing toward people who would otherwise not be in the market.
Right.
There's so many directions we could take this, and I can't create a program that serves all those goals. And so the first step of what I'm proposing is actually need a little bit of time to have the conversations with all the powers to find out what do people agree are the top priorities, because the responses will look different. Or I have 2 more I just thought of. One is the goal to support manufacturing in Vermont, which has been dying and decreasing. And so we want to prioritize Vermont made manufactured factories. And then all of a sudden I want to Vita more and say, what do you need to help that employment? What do you need to help those sites and all that? Or do we not care if it comes from a state or 2 away, but we care about cost? And if you can deliver us a home for under 200 grand, do it no matter what it looks like. And I don't care if it's energy efficient or anything else. We're in a crisis and you gotta just do it. So, or are we gonna utilize the IRA money and solar for all? And so build a program to pay energy efficient?
So I think of this committee, because we share all those jurisdictions, housing and economic development and workforce. I want it all.
No.
I'm greedy.
I
know
if we prioritize everything, we prioritize nothing, and I'm not supporting it.
So, thank you. I'm not sure where we prioritize it all, but I know we need it all. So I don't think it's, and you have to make a choice about, you have to make a choice about what we're going to prioritize with the money we have and the time we have available. Absolutely, we have to prioritize. But I think we need all of what you've just mentioned.
Is this language somewhere that I could look at?
I thought we had the language in section, what we're talking about right now, because we have 2 things, we have another thing we need to chat about with Maura, is the offsite proposal, the offsite construction report, which is section 23 of what I'm looking at is 3.1. And maybe there's a later edition. Cam, I know, is listening, but not in the room.
To my
And so-
knowledge, the language of this has not changed from all the versions.
Right. So what we're looking at is is this, and I don't have a first one as review. My first is identify and recommend a set of state policy objectives and priorities related to off-site housing construction. The second is explore opportunities for using bulk purchase for single and multi-family homes produced through off-site construction to achieve lower construction costs. The third is gather input from potential manufacturers about how to best achieve cost savings through a bulk purchase program. The fourth is determine any new business planning support needed for existing Vermont businesses seeking to develop or expand off-site construction. And the fifth and sixth is exploring creating a working group of neighboring states that considers a regional market and a shared approach. And sixth, estimate the funding and structure needed to support greater development of off-site homes.
But the first one that you read is the one that I think is the next step, which is to shrink the funnel. Are we creating 4 programs here? You know, one for disaster response, one for homelessness, one for homeownership, one for business development, manufacturing, whatever, or 6 or whatever. Because I think that the responses could look different. Maybe there will be a lot of overlap there. Maybe there won't be, but as I keep pointing out, you know, am I supposed to prioritize in-state manufacturing or just nearby manufacturing where transportation costs are low enough that there's some efficiency there?
So I'm going to play devil's advocate certification for the moment, which is if we don't do this, how is this conversation being taken forward on its own? I mean, if we don't invest in this, are not developers, for example, as keen about taking these conversations forward as we are? What would happen to this if we don't fund it?
It's a great question.
Okay.
First off, progress will be made because you didn't have to tell us to write the report that we came out with in January. And so there is some interest in that. I think that there are, we heard from Deputy Commissioner Formulary that there's a $6,000 given to the Fairhaven plant to study how to bring that back online. So that's a body of work that has a momentum that will continue in that one.
Who has been given that money?
The town of Fairhaven.
Okay.
And from there, they hire a subcontractor who I believe I know, but I don't want to say it on the record in case I'm wrong. And they're hiring someone to then do the work for them. Because that's a community development block grant, which always goes to the town. So there would be progress made, like in Fairhaven, because that got funding through something else. There are other manufacturers who, because I've been on YouTube talking about this, we are now getting a lot of calls saying like, well, let me tell you about my product, and a lot of salespeople from inside Vermont and neighboring states and Europe who now have my number and are calling. What I don't have is a person to have conversations with those people. That's where the appropriation comes in. Is I don't know how much I can do with the information that now is coming my way. I didn't mean to be the poster child of offsite housing because of some of the concerns that the senator has raised. I'm not sold that just because it's offsite, it's a good deal. I think we have to be really smart about what makes it a good deal and build toward those goals. And so it's a capacity issue of some progress will be made, but I can't sit here and tell you how much I can get done in a year or 2 years unless I have funding and can hire someone to do this.
So what you're telling us, who have to make this decision, is that is an accelerator. This accelerates.
This would ensure it gets done. Otherwise, this is going to be put into the list of VHFA's priorities, and it's a business decision for my team to decide where it falls, and it may fall high or low. It also is going to, again, not all this money is going to VHFA. It's going to catalyze others if they get bits of money to help them answer these questions, so that when we call up the State Housing Authority to understand their program better, or to manufacturers, things like that, hopefully it's going to mean that other people are prioritizing this topic as well. Because even if VHFA says, this is my top goal and we're going to do something about it, I don't know that VITA is going to prioritize this, or DHCD, or the other partners that I can't move forward without. Because you don't want a VHFA program. You want a state of
No, we want
program.
a state. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions on this proposal at the moment? Randy, Tom? Okay, I think then it would be very helpful. As you know, the VAA is in a sort of challenged mode at the moment for people who with that.
Yeah.
And we aren't fully clear, maybe Keisha has more information, but I think we aren't fully clear yet where we're landing on it. We're almost there, but not fully. However, there are
I don't think
many.
anybody has that
Okay,
information.
well, I thought you.
That's all I know.
Looking at you.
Oh, that's what I'm testifying on. Let me tell you what's gonna happen.
We would all love to know. But I do know that there are many things that won't be in it. And I thought that it was worth hearing about some of the things that are in it, that are policy considerations, that are not money that we could consider and include it on our housing amendment if we wanted.
Yep, I spoke to this committee early on about this idea. This committee has strongly supported the creation of a rental revolving loan fund. This is a middle income program where we are helping spur some development of rental housing that is affordable to residents who would not qualify for tax credit housing, very low income housing, and instead go from folks who miss that cutoff up to 150% of median income. That was a $10 million appropriation, and VHFA already awarded all that money in one board meeting and funded 265 apartments that are in the process of development now. None have been occupied, and I can't show you pictures of them, but I can tell you about what was funded through that. In
They are
designing,
new units that are being constructed.
And where?
I will pull that up and tell you. It did prioritize outside Chittenden County, I can tell you that, but
Yeah.
it's gonna take me a minute to pull that
That's
up.
okay.
So that program has a rule that we put in statute. It was short-sighted on VHFA's part. This is, I'm gonna say, a mistake we made. That we wanted to explain that not only would there be income limits to the residents when they moved in, but the affordability would mean that the owners of the housing that received these subsidized loans could only increase their rent a little bit to make sure that it remained affordable during the length of the subsidized loan, plus 3 years. Because even if you pay back your loan, we want to make sure it stays affordable. You know, it doesn't change in a moment's notice.
Is that the 3%?
What we put in statute was we would only allow rents to increase by 3% a year. What we found, mostly driven by higher than expected insurance costs and higher than expected property taxes, is that costs for buildings are going up more than 3% a year. So the language change that passed the BAA through both chambers, and I'll characterize it as I've gotten positive reception in every committee I've testified on this with, was to change the language so that it says that rents will only increase 3% a year. Or if you can prove that costs have gone up more than that to VHFA, then VHFA could approve an amount higher than that. I still want to keep the 3% in there. I want all developers to know that that's what we're aiming for. And I want anyone who goes above it to have to prove to us, show us your property bills and your insurance bills, that you can't live within 3%. But I'd like to be able to offer to developers that if they can make a case that for that year, their rents are going to go up 4 or 5%, then they can get that waiver through VHFA. And then hopefully the next year it'll be under the 3% cap and going forward. This is a role VHFA plays in general with our government subsidized programs. Obviously, there are federal rules to limit rent increases, but this kind of compliance work is something that we are regularly doing and have the capacity to do. But we put in statute that rents would not exceed 3%. And now the language you're considering would say would not exceed 3% unless VHFA allowed a waiver of it. That's
And key here is that it's a revolving loan fund. So if they can make it all work and pencil out, you're getting money back to put into new units.
yes, yeah.
And right now, from what you said, it sounds like the cost per unit is around $38,000 roughly.
Of the ones that we approved, yes.
10 million.
Yeah.
Divided by 265. That's a very good deal to get. for units.
38,000 to do what?
That's how
Per
much
unit.
subsidy,
Oh, that's how much subsidy
year.
per unit.
because we are only, the program's designed to only give them up to 35% of the total development cost of the building the unit. This is designed to be a subordinate loan program where they're obviously getting rental income, but they have a mortgage with a community bank or lender. And we are come in a second position lien and have this subsidized interest rate. So if the interest rate from the lender is, let's say, 8%, then all of a sudden you get a loan from us at 2%. The effect is they
6%.
blend the rates together depending on the size of those loans, and they end up with effectively a lower interest rate as a result of getting this subsidized rate. And as a reminder, we give even better terms if the developer has pulled in 5% of the cost of construction from a municipality or from an employer. And that's where we're able to take the $10 million of appropriations and leverage $21 million of what I would call non-housing resources, because this is money from employers and municipalities that could have gone to other uses. And it's helped to support this program.
So I just want to say that's, that's the cheapest unit of housing that we've invested our dollars in. That is, or loan also. So it's not, VHIP is like $50,000 a unit and you don't get that money back. So this is creating the cheapest unit of housing that we've invested.
But the VHIP average is way below 50. I mean, we have it, but the average.
I don't think it's
in the
38,000.
30s.
I don't think
And some of those I think are loans, and
Mhm.
let's be clear that we're serving a higher income population, and so they don't need as much subsidy, and the affordability only lasts the
right.
greater of the length of the loan or 7 years.
Well, I would just say when I would go to appropriations, these are the kinds of things that I use to make my decisions about where we put dollars is the cost per unit. And the fact that it's a loan means that we're getting that money back to put into more unit.
The language, because I didn't have it pulled up, right now already just says the annual increase in rent for a subsidized unit does not exceed 3%. And we're proposing, and what the BAA passed was the additional language, a comma, the annual increase in rent for a subsidized unit does not exceed 3% or an amount otherwise authorized by VHA.
And there's language there, if you can prove the cost.
It doesn't say, we don't go into that level of detail.
Okay.
And you can hold me accountable and I'll be here every year and tell you what kind of rent increases if you want us to. But again, this is just normal corporate business for us. We don't, in statute, we don't go into a lot of programmatic
No, that's
detail
good.
because we end up in these situations where we wrote something and then said, in reality, we see it.
So, what is the committee's thought on this? I am, and we're clear it's now out of the BAA?
No, this passed the BAA. It's in the
appreciate
BAA. You tell me the status of the BAA, but should the BAA not pass
Okay.
with this language, then we would love a vehicle to get this policy change moved, because we have, there's a lot of these loans that we've awarded but haven't closed on. And so we have legal documents with the developers that lay out and stipulate these rules. So we're really eager to get this. That's why I went with the BAA.
This is the conditional support. So I would ask us how, I would propose that we condition this on what happens with the BAA. But if this is not included in the BAA, that we consider adding this one of our amendment pieces for our housing bill.
I have, oh, sorry.
We were talking about a 37-page document that Heidi just sent out to us. So for me to say,
What?
I don't know what.
It's not a 37-page document.
I see.
The language is one sentence.
I don't know what we're being asked right now. So
I think this is what we're being asked. This modest language change. Is that?
So you're taking them each
Could I-
one by one
can
right
we
now.
point to that language? Well, before I would
Yes,
support it as an
I-
amendment, I would
That was
like
the
to walk
next thing
through
I was gonna ask is,
with
do
us.
we, Maura, have language that I know we have the language in the BAA. Do we have this one sentence addition in a section that we could consider or look at least?
Do you,
Sorry.
so I think to Senator Chittenden's concern, we have a lot of possible language. I'm starting to feel if we're confused, other people might get confused if we start amending the bills that are on their way to the floor next week. I don't see this. This is the first one where an element of urgency has been introduced that we couldn't attach it to a bill we get from the House. But none of these bills are moving any faster. So is the value that you can signal to the people you're working with that it lives somewhere else now and will get done by the end of session?
Yes,
So it helps. This might be then the only case to be made that there's
that it's
urgency to add to to our housing bill that's going to the floor next week.
that is what that's what I had heard, that there was urgency in the signal.
Yes.
Okay, what I think we need for us to consider is we have,
Can I get into Zoom, please? Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Sorry, that was not subtle. I know.
I have to
You are
write
paying
that,
attention.
always appreciated in this committee. Because I'm not interested in it absorbing a 37-page document. I agree. But I think if we can signal in simply,
This is dangerous. I'm showing you my email. I hope I can look right. Yeah. Okay. Apologies, this isn't prettier. But right now in the BAA, there is this section, and this underlined portion is what we're talking about.
okay, could we make it, is it possible to make that substantially bigger? Or somebody
I
said,
can read it.
Oh, wait, there we go. Oh, I did.
good woman. Or an amount otherwise authorized by the agency.
Do you really anticipate coming into every single one of these requests above 3% and adjudicating it? Is that really something?
And that's really something we do. It's not by unit, it's by project. And so of the 265 units, they're spread among dozen projects, I'm gonna roughly say. So we're really talking about bulk projects. And there's other compliance we have to do. And so looking at this,
What if the owner, landlord wants to do renovations that, you know, are above and beyond cost of living growth that you estimate somewhere around 3%?
mhm,
You know, what this is, you know,
they would have to pay for that with those sources and the rents. These are,
increasing.
well, increase it to the amount that we approve, but, if someone want to come in and put in luxury granite countertops and all that, but, if there was a need to do, improvements, yeah, we do allow for that.
You have to look at it.
Yeah, and so I think we would take into account that typically what we do is we take into account, like, is this a necessary repair or is this a luxury repair? And make the determination from there. It's a lot of back and forth with, that's what we do, compliance monitoring of over 9,000 units in the state every year. And this is a part of what we do.
BHA.
So we will get that language from, would you be kind of, or has Chad already sent it to? I believe he has.
I'll double check, but if he hasn't, somebody tells me he's watching and doing it as we're speaking. And not to mention, this is the language that passed the BAA.
We've already voted on. We've already voted on this language. We've approved this language. We want to make sure this language survives in a more timely fashion, which is what was asked for in the BAA in the first place. And so I think we.
So just so I don't appear to simply be obstinate, I would move this language because it's the only one we've heard about that's urgent, and move that we propose this as a committee amendment to the housing bill. And since I'm reporting it, if we pass this, I'd love to have the figures on how successful this program has been. basically, and
how many units are at stake at the
and
moment.
how you would, yes, how you would word the sense of urgency to signal
I
this.
I think that's key.
So
So that's
that's my motion.
that, well, thank you. That's before we even have to see more than this. So
That's it.
yeah, that is it, but I would hope that our amendment would be a very modest piece of that much larger statute work and just keep this section of the,
But this is the amendment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nor am I trying to be obstinate. So this bill is going to be before Senate Finance this afternoon. I would like to see this as an amendment from CAM, that when that's in front of us, I'll be happy to say, yes, put my name on it.
Well, what if, I thought you were gonna say, what if finance introduced?
You can also do that if you want to talk to finance this afternoon. We got the full afternoon.
I think you're gonna have a full enough conversation. I think we get the urgency of it and the number of units at stake and I think if we can at least have it in our back pocket, I'm not sure it needs to be a finance.
Well, but then we should present it to finance this afternoon. Things are gonna get very confusing on the floor.
Yeah,
If this is the only amendment,
well,
we're
no,
fine.
I would hope that our amendments would be consolidated into one amendment from whoever on this committee wants to offer it. I definitely think this would be one piece of that amendment. And what we're also going to talk about right after Maura is done is what additional amendments, particularly the housing bill right now, are we ready to move on, if any, by, but I would very much like to have this amendment if people are willing and able, and I would put my name on it with you and whoever else, because amendments have individual names on them.
I'm trying not to be obstinate.
Sorry, I guess maybe I'm not understanding you.
I just think that what I worry about is that we're starting to signal to people, if you don't get in our amendment, then you might have lost ground.
That is,
The only things I think are worth putting in an amendment, since we have so many vehicles to consider everything else, are things that have urgency to, signal a modest change that was already in motion.
That's fair because we're halfway through and the House still has to take all this up. So all of those discussions can.
that is
They can be there or they can be here. I mean,
absolutely on housing. That's absolutely the case because we have a housing bill coming at us. Labor, we don't have a labor bill coming at us. So I would hope that we could make some decisions about the labor pieces independent of the housing pieces, but this has urgency and I would very much support.
I mean, I'm negotiating against myself and all the housing things I care about, but I don't want to confuse people on the floor unnecessarily if we have time to keep working.
We have time to keep working on off-site. And that is not, the off-site construction is not a time sensitive. I mean, that can be this session.
Right.
And so I'm happy to consider it not being an amendment for this
Right.
very moment.
And even with the labor bill, I guess what I'm saying is while they're in other committees, the people are used to seeing on the floor an amendment from another committee. They're not used to seeing a number of the original committee sending an amendment along. I think it's ideal
It
to
happens.
have the money committees add amendment.
In general agreement with Senator Hinsdale, I will say it does happen.
It does happen. It happens.
End of the session.
End of the session more so than now, but either way.
The only issue is clarity. Because when it goes to finance, there has to be clarity as to why an exception is potentially being authorized. The amendment itself doesn't specify that, and it's a believe me amendment. Believe my assertion that this is going to be looked at and so on. And the only question there would be whether or not you can add some additional language to say as recommended by the VHFA after, but due to extenuating circumstances and recorded by and realized by.
Well, and I mean, finance, I think, is as equipped as appropriations to hear, this was in the BAA and it's uncertain, so we need it here.
But as you put it in language, the why needs to be there. That's all.
Okay, but we need that language ready to either have finance consider, I'm happy to consider it here and have it be done. So I don't, whatever is your pleasure, but I think we should move along because we have other things for us to chat about in terms of what we will have, where we want to move. So Keisha's made a motion. There's a motion on the floor. And I would support that motion to add this as an amendment, for consideration, on our housing bill as an amendment.
I love, so
And I see the language, so I just want to see the amendment that I'm
Sure.
voting. But yes, I'm a yes.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
let me see that language.
Okay.
And should it, speaking of seeing the language, I mean, it's there, but then we'd have to write it as so-and-so introduces it. The so-and-so, does finance want, what do you prefer? Because I can go either
I
way.
think we've heard probably more time than finance is going to have for this issue. I would suggest we move this and take it in our pocket to
Yeah,
finance.
that's fine.
But we'd have to take it to finance.
No, fine. I don't think you have to take this to finance.
We'll look at it at the time it looks at it, but only.
This could be an
if it
amendment on the
exists.
floor.
Yeah, it could be, it will still wind up being looked at by finance, so I think we should give them today the heads up that there will be
So-
that amendment, so it all be
Can we
considered
So-
at the same
during your
time.
speech with these sentences in this?
Fair, but this at least is, it's at the very least an appropriations question. So
Absolutely. And
it's better if it's not done on the floor, but it's done by the time it gets to
I
appropriation.
would love to have it included in one of their.
Okay, and I think they
amendments.
asked me to testify. and I feel all
Yeah, yeah.
guilty.
So Cam, if you are listening, we would love to have a draft of this. We go on the floor at 10. And maybe we could have it by the end of the morning, if that's possible, so that we could consider, so that
I don't
we
think,
take it, but we can,
I'm not
look at
even
this
invited to
tomorrow.
finance, but it needs, it should be seen in a,
we,
no one's even invited. But
they haven't.
Would you like to come to mine?
I think we'd like to,
you know, if you're inviting me,
she misses finance. So Cam, we would just
No,
want
I
a
do.
draft of this amendment, and I assume Chad and Maura are in touch with you.
I took the opportunity to email this to not only Cam, but Heidi, so that those watching who want to see it on the website,
And then we will do it, even though there's a motion on the table, we will look at the language and make a decision in the morning.
Heidi, can you do me a favor and talk to the committee assistant in approps? Because I think they invited me to come in and I can't.
They did it with one today or something today with the chair.
But that's okay. They're doing economic development with me at once, so
Okay.
I think that we can't do housing and economic development at the same time.
I'm sorry, do you want me to reach out?
I don't know if it's our decision. I thought they were giving us 45 minutes.
They haven't said that.
Yes, they did.
They said we have 45 minutes.
I'll talk to you.
Okay.
Let's chat.
Just tell me
I just got that.
when you can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maura. I think the off-site conversation, depending on how people are feeling, and that's part of our conversation next, is we'll either do an amendment or we will continue the conversation once we get our housing bill from the House.
Mhm.
It is not in the housing bill. Is it in the House's housing bill? So then we'll have that conversation as it comes over. So there's no urgency in it at this very moment.
Correct. The study.
Right. It's in the housing bill. Okay.
the house.
Yeah, that's it. Right. Anything else?
No,
Thank you.
thank you.
This is great. So we have 35 minutes and we have the Prop 3 on the floor. We have decisions to make about what amendment we make, if we have an amendment on our labor bill and on our housing bill. We have 3 issues still on the labor bill to make a decision about as individuals, because all the amendments come from, at this point, from us as individuals. So we have the decision to make on assistant AGs. I think we have decided from our conversation yesterday, I think there are 4 of us. I think that, anyway, I'd love to have we have assistant AGs, we have decertification, and we have,
Certified.
certified payroll. And we can take them individually, or I would, if possible, it'd be great to do only one amendment on those issues, but we may have to do them individually. So what is, on certified payroll, let's begin at the bottom this time because we, certified payroll, I am ready to move on it. It is a required, I'm ready to move, supporting, having certified payroll.
Well, I'm actually glad that AG's office is here because, it was pointed out to me that the alarm bells were raised more about those records, going to the AG's office in our language, which I think was something from Massachusetts. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you come join us?
Thanks. David McMurray here on behalf of Work in Vermont, the Vermont Building Construction Trades Council. Well, the AG's office has full authority around misclassification issues.
Mhm,
So we passed the statute a few years ago, which says concurrent jurisdiction
mhm.
with the Department of Labor. So, but yes, that language that is proposed was, so the genesis of it was from the Massachusetts law, which is comparable to other states. So I'm not seeing the concern about the AG's office only because of the fact that they already have jurisdiction over misclassification issues. But so what you're saying is that there was a concern raised that the information would go to the AG's office?
Yeah, I mean, that's a piece that we hadn't taken as much testimony on. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think that would blunt a lot of further concern being raised after this passes our committee. And would, in my mind, keep as we include these things, keep the whole bill relatively low profile. The bigger concern with the AG's office getting this info.
I guess if you wanted to take out, and I'm obviously thinking on the fly here, but if you wanted to take out the information automatically going to the AG's office, I mean, I don't see why that's, at least right now, a
Right,
big deal, but they can get it.
exactly.
But
They
it's
can always
also,
ask for it.
but it's also, just the other side of it, the AG's office, we hope, will and has increasingly play a role in
Right.
stopping this classification.
Right.
This is a critical piece of information as it relates to this classification. So having the AG's office have access to it makes a lot of
Yes.
sense.
But don't they have access to anything they ask for?
They have to ask for it, yeah,
With DOL.
yeah. So,
Thomas?
So I think where Senator Ron Hinsdale might be coming from, and where I only have one frame of reference, my past morning committee was transportation. And at this time in the session, if something did make crossover that seemed to still have merit for further discussion, we wouldn't jam it. We wouldn't put it onto this thing. We would just have the chair or the members talk to their house counterparts and say, yeah, we were open to that. Why don't you look on it and put it back on the bill? And then the still is being toiled. The soil is being tilled. So I just would say,
Something's
I don't think we
toiled.
Something is,
have to put this onto an amendment right now. In fact, I think maybe the House can keep talking about it. We can have these conversations. And
the labor bill enables them to have any
Exactly.
conversation about labor that they would like.
the
So,
soil has been
Well-
tilled here, so they can do it over there.
as you know, it is the first day of spring, so happy to hear.
Oh, yay.
But I would, along those lines, if you wanted to take out the automatics, having it automatically sent to the AG's office, I would be fine with that so that we could have further discussion with the House.
Because we're not
They don't
getting a
have
labor
a-
vehicle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the next point I was going to make on this is it's part of that 17-page, one of the 4 drafts. So if we're going to proceed with this, I'd really like to pull it out and do a separate document and see exactly what the language is.
Mhm.
okay, Sophie, we did not loop Sophie into
Yeah, I
the
don't
fact that
need
we were.
what else? So I just
Yeah.
don't
So-
see it in black and white.
Right. These 3 things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mentioned this to some of you, in terms of addressing concern about being able to get up to speed on how to do this. I'd be open to, if you all are having, the effective date for certified payroll be a year out.
So that we can work out all the
It'll give the
kinks.
AGC and others time to educate their members. Our members are ready to do it. We've had multiple contractors contact us saying they want this. And so to the extent to which there needs to be education on how to fill out a certified payroll form and send it in and how to receive it,
Mhm.
putting it out a year in terms of the effective date, I think might make sense. So I just offer that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think this is time well spent because we can tell Sophie, you know, we agree on these 3 additional things potentially, with these names on the amendment and with these changes,
Yeah.
to the original language.
The only caveat being on this AG piece, I would want to think about it a little bit more and be able to just,
Yeah,
in transparency, if we think about it more in the house.
sure,
be able to
sure.
have that.
But people are okay with that.
So we're running out of time, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes,
So I'm definitely good with the AAGs, being able to unionize, but happy to continue that. And I'm fine with something regarding the decertification on this piece. The other concern I have is, and that's where I'm not ready to put it on
Mhm.
our amendment, but I think I could be there by the end. I'm just worried about the little guy, as I was talking about it.
with which issue?
So the certified payroll. So the certified payroll is a way that if you are with your cousin doing small jobs, and you have to meet these regulatory burdens, I think they're going to stop applying for these state funded jobs. So I'm not against it. I just think I need more testimony to be yes today. So I would prefer not to put it on this amendment where I am right now, but I hope the House takes this up, and between now and then I can talk to more.
Well,
These.
I think it would be hard for them to just take it up out of whole cloth.
Yeah.
It would be like us taking it up out of whole cloth onto the floor. I had continued conversations about the little guy, and that's where these 2 pieces essentially come from. Is, you know, people are worried, like, I don't know, all of a sudden I have to send something to the top cop in the state, like, you know, how does that make me feel?
They won't apply for they won't bid on the jobs, and so that will help the larger organizations cut out more competition for the smaller Vermont jobs. So I'm wondering if there's a threshold for Vermont jobs at a certain amount is where the certified payroll would have to trigger. That's where I need more information. And that's why I'm not ready.
I think I'd like to, and I think my understanding is there wouldn't be small contractors applying for some of these. Are big Davis-Bacon jobs.
Well, yeah,
Right,
Vermont
I mean,
prevailing wage.
the prevailing
statute
wage is
takes
not-
certain projects, I believe, over 100,000.
Doesn't this apply to the Vermont jobs that are not the Davis-Bacon?
No, this applies to only Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage.
It's in the section under prevailing wage.
Yeah, it's in the-
This is prevailing wage. This is
My
big.
understanding from conversations is that this would apply to other jobs that aren't in the Davis-Bacon.
I
That's
don't-
where I'm not ready
It's already
to.
covered by Davis Bacon. Why do we need?
Yeah.
Well, just to be clear, Davis-Bacon is
My
federal.
understanding is broader than that.
Davis-Bacon is federal law. So that when we talk about Davis-Bacon, that is federal law. We're talking about applying the same standards that we do for every contractor who does a Davis-Bacon job to Vermont construction jobs under.
In the prevailing wage.
Under
section.
the,
So I'd just like to remind us, we're having the woman from AOT come in tomorrow morning to talk about the certified payroll. We'll make a decision about this tomorrow. Pull out the language for us to look at. I would, and clarify with Sophie that this applies to people who are working under the prevailing wage and under the Davis-Bacon. This is not for every little small construction company that's.
I'm just, if the discussion is defined with clarity and can point to the reference so that we clearly understand what it does not apply to, because that's part of the problem, right?
understood.
So by tomorrow.
We
we're
will be
gonna
looking at this.
Look
We'll
at
pull
our
out,
amendment style.
we'll be pulling out this language.
Okay.
We will be,
But when you say pulling out the language, I'm confused.
Well,
You
in
want
the
to look at
language from
these 3 pieces
652.
as an amendment.
we have 652. This piece is, all these.
I
three
don't
pieces-
want to look at.
No, but this is the
in the whole
language.
package. So what I think we need to look at tomorrow, if we're gonna vote, is a draft amendment.
Of what we want to consider in
And
the amendment.
I'd like to put on the table the 2026 and the removing the AG piece for the amendment we look at tomorrow.
Right, I hear that.
Okay.
So sorry, that was certified payroll, removing the AG.
Yes.
The AAGs in the amendment, I think they're,
If I could, since they're in the room, can I ask one question? So,
absolutely.
the effectiveness amendment.
Welcome back, Sarah, to introduce yourself.
In the environment of proposal 3, does it make the whole point viewed if proposal 3 goes through?
So thank you for the question. So Sarah London, Chief Assistant Attorney General, and
I appreciate the committee's work on this. I think we've had fewer than 30 minutes of testimony from the Attorney General's office on this very complicated topic. So that's an interesting question. Other states that have collective bargaining of AAGs is collective bargaining of all state lawyers. So that's the case in California, and that would seem to track more with the possible constitutional approach. The collective bargaining unit of lawyers in California is all lawyers, all administrative law judges, and all hearing officers. This is also true in New Jersey. All state lawyers are AEGs because there is a statute that prohibits the hiring of lawyers by agencies. And the Attorney General in New Jersey is appointed by the governor. So the Attorney General serves the governor. If I may, just very briefly, because I think there has been misinformation.
But can
about
I
this
just
in the
say,
committee.
we have had more than half an hour of testimony.
I
on
don't
this
believe
topic.
so. If it's been from someone other than me and Todd, I haven't seen it. So this
Yeah,
is the
we had
17th.
testimony from the other, from those who are wanting to.
Yeah, right, from the Attorney General's office, trying to explain the complexity of this. approach.
Oh, okay,
Trying
but we've
to-
had more than half an hour testimony on this topic. We've had more than half an hour of testimony from the AG's office as well, between the two of you.
That's not my understanding. This is the 17 pages of legislation that this body did for the collective bargaining of deputy state's attorneys. So here you define the employer to be the department. You defined all kinds of logistics associated with collective bargaining so that nothing was left to the labor board. We have copies of this. We can pass them around. The only litigation at the labor board with respect to deputy state's attorneys was before anything came to the legislature. Which set of laws apply? Are these municipal or state? The legislature then stepped in through months of testimony, hours of testimony, working with the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs, crafted 17 pages of law to make sure that none of this went back to the labor board. So we never had deputy SAs having to testify about what they do and who should be in collective bargaining and who isn't. In Connecticut, where there is some collective bargaining of AAGs have petitioned to be excluded from that collective bargaining. And that's another form of the sort of messy litigation that can result if we don't resolve these things by statute. So I know that's a long answer to your question, but I just want to point out this is a complicated area where we have seen no language as to how the legislature intends to go about
So
this.
you're saying you'd like to come back with a draft of this for AAG?
I'm saying this is the approach the body took with respect to deputy state's attorneys. It saves the cost money.
But it sounds like we had their employers at the table being helpful on how to craft the language.
In the legislature, yes, and that's what we're asking for here. We have not seen a bill.
So,
We
but
don't
are
quite
you
know.
gonna write some language?
We are so happy to review any draft. you
But
will
you're not gonna
share
write
with us.
anything. You're
So
not gonna
We would
talk.
generally work with your ledge counsel on that, but we are very happy to work with you and to try to figure out how the deputy state's attorney legislation might work for the Attorney General's office. That's what I've been trying to
So
explain.
can I just finish my line of questioning? So you are wanting to get to yes by the end of session and have something like this.
I want
Or-
to avoid a litigation process for the Attorney General's office in the state that will be expensive and very disruptive for our employees.
But the Attorney General's office is willing to enter into full negotiations and discussions about how to produce language like this by the end of session.
We would like to review a draft. Yes, please.
Why,
If
tell me
there
why
is
you
a
keep
draft.
saying you'd like to review a draft, because you all are
So
lawyers.
that we know what is being voted on here. Our
No,
understanding is
but why
what's being
can't you
done.
work on language as well?
So we're happy to
She's
work
offered
with
that.
your ledge
She's offered-
counsel on language. We haven't seen any language from
I
this
think what
committee.
I'm
other-
hearing is that, I don't think we're in a position to say the Attorney General should move forward with something that the office obviously does not agree with. And that's what I'm hearing. But at the same time, they don't know all the things that they may or may not agree with because we haven't gotten to the point of even discussing it.
Well, and it
that's
hasn't,
what I'm saying. And
But we're not
that's my
gonna
point.
get to the point of doing this and
Well, look,
have you
that was my
disagree.
point. At this stage where we've got this kind of situation, this is not ready for prime time. I need more information, not just in terms of the Attorney General positions and what they may be, I need more information about what we're getting into in terms of potential conflicts of interest. The main issue that concerned me about the unionization of AGs. We haven't had discussion about what's happened in other states by those states that have elected not to do this and have considered it. So there are lots of missing pieces of information. This has not been thoroughly discussed, and we're not going to do this on the Wednesday before or the Thursday.
And if I may, yesterday we ended our discussion by deferring to your need and request to take more time. I think we need to have the AG's office and the VSEA and our Ledge Council and maybe a member or two of this committee who'd like to work together to see if we can get to a proposal that we could consider this session. I think that is what I would perhaps move this conversation forward. Thomas, in this case.
This is helpful. I really appreciate this. I just wonder if we did move forward with what we've been talking about, if that would send a signal to your office to come to the table with the House to then see that we want to allow them to unionize, and then you might go through with the interest of knowing that this is likely to happen with
That's
the
right.
language that you want. So I still support moving this forward to just clearly indicate that AAG should have the right to organize. And I would hope that that would then translate to a prioritization of your part in the House to help find language that would make this a smoother
To
implementation.
find a land.
That's where I am.
Same.
Okay.
And we don't have another vehicle to attach something to necessarily. And
We
I
don't.
completely agree with Senator Chitten's point that I don't see a reason that you all would come to the table if you're coming to bring us this now. Unless we indicate that we would really ask you to do that in good faith.
And we're just asking for the same process that this body used for the deputy state's attorneys. So there were multiple drafts. There was a multi-month process.
You
There
can
were
have
hours
that.
of technical-
You
So
can
we're
have
just
that.
trying to avoid uncertainty and expense for the state. If we
We're getting that request from you on March 21st, happy whatever, equinox.
The 20th.
So is it the 20th?
It is the 20th.
So
So we
that can happen. I agree with Senator Chittenden. We should signal here, we want that to happen by the end of session.
By NAM.
And we're happy to work on it outside of committee.
Or I think actually what we're signaling to the House is that we would like to have this conversation and that we encourage them to have it further in the House.
Well, right, but that can
Right.
happen with us at the table. It just isn't gonna happen in committee. So let's move forward with the language we've been talking about for 2 months. And then work on more detail.
No, we've been working on it since we have been reviewing 652. So committee's pleasure. We have, this is an individual choice to do this, to do all our amendments. We do them as individuals. And I think that Sarah, you do have something else to say?
No, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Sorry, no, thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this decision at the moment?
So
Dave, sorry, Dave.
can I ask about the process? So if we
Yeah.
pass a small paragraph as an amendment that basically authorizes AGs to unionize, in the end, is the expectation the House produces something like this to kind of flesh it out? Is that the process you're talking about?
What?
What I would suspect to happen in my 4 years here so far, that if the House's chair, the relevant committee, sees merit in proceeding with this and indicates that to the Attorney General's office, they would then be much more motivated to say, okay, well, this is going to happen. We'd like to see this, 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 and this. So that's what I would expect to occur based on my 4 years in this role.
But without it, it's next session.
And,
Or not at all.
and
Of course.
the pandemic kind of took away our prevailing attitude that we work things out outside of committee, that we all go sit down in the cafeteria to hash things out over the next 2 months. But we make those decisions with the attitude of, do we move forward with something now so that people know we believe in this? And then what I'm saying is we can be at the table too for the longer version. But we are clearly, having to make a decision about if we believe in this on March 20th and not moving forward.
So we've talked about signaling already this morning. So, right, well, we have, yeah. And so this, in my mind at the moment, is signaling that we want to move this conversation forward, that we believe that many of us at least believe that the assistant attorney generals have at least the right to organize. Then I think this calls the question on this. And I would hope that after crossover, and once this is in the House, that Chair Marcotte would be doing exactly what we have done, which is pull all the interested parties together and develop a proposal that we could all consider later this spring. That's where it will go.
Is it?
Oh, sorry, Mark.
I thought it was going to Holly. Labor organizing
Sorry.
usually goes to.
Sorry, it's go to Mark Mahalis. I don't know why I've got one.
No, I don't know if things changed.
It would go to Mark Mahali's committee, House General. For further discussion.
I don't think that we typically are in a position to get to a piece of legislation that we say that effectively we're going to adopt by passing something that is incomplete, that we haven't thought through thoroughly, that we haven't gathered the evidence that we need, we haven't spoken to the people that we need to speak to, and so we're just going to pass it, that somebody else is going to deal with it. I don't think that's appropriate.
And
I don't think that is the common way we do things.
I don't know, I'm never sure
If
there
it
is.
is, that's when we screw things up, we do things. like that.
Right. I think what you're arguing for is that we actually take this on and that maybe we work together with the House and that we take the time to oversee this process for this.
That's fine.
So we're taking a vote on whether or not we keep our one sentence in.
Whether or not we keep this language in this
Yes.
particular
So
bill
I think
going
we should,
forward.
I think.
Well,
we're
it's
ready
not in the bill. I'll just remind us.
For the amendment.
For
For
the amendment.
that's
In an amendment, that it was the section in our 652 that addressed, and it's more than one sentence, that addresses and gives the assistant attorney generals the right to organize.
You can certainly include in language that this, if you think it's necessary, and I'm not sure that it is, that we will examine further this particular question and in some way, shape, or form, then make a decision or recommendation. But I don't know that's the kind of thing we typically put in legislation. It's not that this necessarily dies here, but that this is not ready for passage right now for something that the legislature should pass.
I'll just remind us that all this does, and it was 654, I apologize, it's the draft 654. All it does is give it gives the assistant AGs the right to organize. And that discussion, bypassing that discussion, it calls the question on that discussion.
That's a
and it would,
fundamental part of the question as to whether or not we want to do that. I'm not sure that we do because I don't have enough information to make.
and
that
you don't
decision.
feel we're ready to do that. And I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. And I think we have two choices. One is we can continue this work as in the second half of this session and work with the House on developing this, or we give this to the House
I
by
think it's the both and.
signaling to the House. How is it both and? I think it's both and, but I think that if we pass this section 1 from 654 as drafted, that we then signal to the House that we would like to have this conversation and that we would like for them to flush this out.
Well, and we can also work with them.
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing that
Give us a
prevails us
signal.
from working with
Give
the
us a
AG, the
signal,
union.
an affirmation,
both
and that affirmation is ill-developed at this point.
I think that debate is worthy of the floor, and I don't think I think it's a perfectly fine conversation to have because we've had other attorneys say, this is very cut and dry. You know, I think we can arm ourselves with lots of reasons why we can move forward with simple language and continue to work on it. We do that all
Well,
the
we
time.
continue to work on it without language. We don't need the language to work on something.
And I think we will. I think there's a guarantee from this conversation that we will be continuing to work on this.
We're happy to work on it. I'm happy to get more information. I'm happy to get testimony, but I am not happy with passing something now
I would be in agreement with you if we were in May, but we're in April and we're going late.
We're not even in April yet.
I'm sorry, we're in
We're
March.
in March.
So I think that I am ready for this because it is a principled statement that whoever signs on to this amendment supports unionization and labor organizing for this group that, based on the testimony, I've seen merit in allowing for that. I agree with you though, that if this was the bill that was finally to be concurred with from the House, I think it needs more debate and more fine tuning. I just think to get the relevant parties to offer
the
that.
language that we're putting in right now, there's no guarantee that debate is going to occur because we have no control of what happens in that.
If we don't do it, it won't happen.
We're on the floor in
Get
8
to the
minutes.
table. I don't think.
We don't need to make a final decision on this at the moment. On the other hand, I think that I think there are, anyway, it's all on individuals. I think we can have the debate on the floor, but I definitely think we will be signaling this to Mark Mahaly and his committee that we would like to have a fuller discussion of this after crossover.
So we're gonna see it in an amendment tomorrow.
We're going to see it in an amendment. So in an amendment, we will be looking at, Sophie, we will be drafting up. We'll have all 3 of these pieces and we'll vote on each one of them. And decide what we're going to include or not. We have the assistant AGs. We have the certified payroll and the certification. And we may have a compromise that we want to work on that percent that we can chat about, but I've heard a compromise of 45% for us to consider, 40 or 45%. And we just need to have that conversation and then we need to signal it to Sophie.
Who are you pointing at with the 45?
I am looking at the union.
Okay.
It's general rule, I'm not afraid
So
to compromise.
I think we need to have that conversation and give Sophie an amount that we may determine. Dave?
Just one more, David Mickenberg, one more piece of information, just to clarify on the sort of little contractor. We had always thought and envisioned that this would apply because it's in the section around prevailing wage, which there is a threshold for prevailing wage to apply, which is $100,000 or more. And so we had always thought that would be in that section. So it's a very small, as Mr. Wabi talked about, the one replacement of one window, unless that costs $100,000, it would not apply.
Right.
So
That's helpful.
Great. Okay. So I think we're in a good place. We will have this further discussion and land on these decisions tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, AG's office. Thank you, David. Thank you.